Hello, Charles. Great to see you.
Hey, Elliot. How you doing, mate? All good?
Yeah, doing great. I can't complain. I mean, I can complain a little. It's funny. I live in a place that is renowned for being freezing cold, and we are currently in an excessive heat warning where we're advised not to go outside. So I feel like if you get the one, you shouldn't get the other. But that's just, I guess, how it works on the planet these days.
But do you like the other, Elliot? Are you tempted to go outside?
I mean, I am more tempted to go outside in this than in what's coming in a few months. Let's put it that way. But who needs to go outside when there's so much great Arsenal football news to digest? And that is what we're here to talk about. For the people watching on YouTube and things like that on video, I'm going to wave this around. A beautiful book that has arrived at my home. It says here on the book, Revolution, The Rise of Arteta's Arsenal. It has your name at the bottom, Charles Watts. It must be a really proud moment for you to see this, Charles. And I just want to congratulate you. And before we dive into the book and, of course, into transfers for #clicks, do you want to just tell people quickly where they can get it? I know you're doing a signing event at the Tollington. That's coming up. But anything else you want to tell people about being able to get the book?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can find the link to pre-order on my Twitter or X, whatever you call it nowadays. I keep posting that out. It's links direct to the publisher's web page for it, which is HarperCollins, and on there you can either order it direct or it's listed, your Amazons, your Waterstones, your WH Smith, all that lot, where you can pre-order it from as well. So you can find anywhere you want there to pre-order it ahead of the launch on August 31st, and then of course you can come down, like you said, to the Tollington on the 31st for the big launch event there, where you're going to have Stoke Newington Bookshop going to be there selling the book. I'm going to be there signing, and then from sort of 7:15 p.m. onwards, myself, Gunner Blog, aka James McNicholas, and Sam Dean of The Telegraph are going to host a sort of panel event, Q&A, where we're going to talk all things Arsenal, talk about start to season, talk about Mikel Arteta, and of course open the floor to questions from hopefully an audience, if there is one, which fingers crossed there will be. So yeah, get yourself down to the Tollington on the 31st. It should be a really fun night of Arsenal chat.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm sure there will be a great audience there, and hopefully, if there's any self-respecting Arsenal fans, there'll be some Jaeger bombs poured as well. Look, I think what you've done is brilliant, and I've not written a book myself because what with the not being good at writing stuff, that would have been a mistake. I'm just curious, what are some of the things about this process that jump out to you? And we will get to the general Arsenal news and things like that, but I mean, this is really the topic at Arsenal that matters more than anything else, the rise of Mikel Arteta's Arsenal. So what are some of the things about the process of writing this that maybe stood out to you as an exceptional experience or a surprise, or little tidbits from the book that whet people's appetite for that, but also give them an insight into maybe some of the things you got to experience that you weren't expecting?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, it's my first book, so I went into this with a big sort of blank page in front of me. I didn't know what to expect. It was...
Out of curiosity, for other authors, do they go into it with the page written already? Because I feel that would make the process much easier rather than the blank page. If the page is already written, then I could probably do it. But I admire you for starting from a blank page. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Go on.
It was, it was. I think I got approached around sort of February by the publishers, HarperCollins, who were interested in doing this book. And they said to me, basically, are you interested in writing it? And I thought about it for a while, and it's always been an ambition of mine to do this. Since I first got into the industry, even before I first got into the industry, the thought of having a book with my name on it was just always been just a huge ambition of mine. And then to be able to do it about a man who intrigues me just so much, who's such an interesting character, was great. And to also do it about the football club that I love and has played such a huge part in my life for the last 40 odd years, it was just an opportunity I couldn't turn down. But I did go into it thinking, what the hell am I doing here? I've never done it before. I'm doing it on top of my job. I was working at Goal then, and we were in the title race. I've got 2 young kids, and it was, at one point I was like, what the hell have I done? How am I going to write 75,000 words on top of it?
I'm going to find a quiet room to write 75,000 words.
This house is this is like the only remotely tidy bit of this house is this tiny corner. It's just a chaos. And so, I think after about 2 days, I thought, what have I done? I've bitten off far too much so I can chew here. But I slowly got into it. I wanted to start the whole process because it's about Mikel, obviously, and about the rise, as the title says. But I wanted to do it about more than just that. I wanted to sort of get into Mikel, the player, at Arsenal, the time he spent at Arsenal, how he signed, and then sort of build the picture of him as a coach and the influence he has in his whole game. You know, going back to Johan Cruyff with Barcelona, who Mikel absolutely holds in such high regards. Like he was asked, who's your most influential footballer, your favourite footballer of all time, who made such an impact? He's like, it wasn't a footballer, it was a manager. It was Johan Cruyff. And so sort of delving into that, and of course going into his time at Manchester City with Pep, what he learned, and then starting the Arsenal story. So I really thought that was an important way to start off the book, and because I think that kind of sets the scene about him and how he became the kind of coach and the man that he is now that we see at Arsenal. And I really enjoyed that part of writing it as well. I spoke to people like Bakary Sagna, who was a teammate and a great friend of Mikel at Arsenal, but then was also a player at Manchester City when Mikel joined the coaching staff. And it was really interesting talking to Bakary about that, about, you know, first what he was like at Arsenal as a captain and as a player. And he told me some really interesting bits, like he'd go round with Santi Cazorla and Andre Santos, and they'd go around regularly to watch football at Mikel's house. Mikel had a barbecue, and Bakrie's like strolling in and open the door, and all he's looking for is food. And before he even said hello, Mikel's going, "What formation are Barca going to play tonight? You know, how are they going to set up?" Bakrie's saying, I literally just want a burger. I haven't got through the door yet, and you're talking tactics and formations with me. And, you know, it's just really interesting insights like that into Mikel, the man, and, you know, how everyone knew at that point he was going to go on and have this career in the game as a coach and a manager. It was just startlingly obvious to everyone. And I really enjoyed writing that part of it before we got to this journey that we've all been on for the last, 4 years since 2019. And so I thought that was an important part. And then, of course, from 2019 onwards, the book's about the journey, like I said, the highs, the lows, the big decisions that Mikel's had to make, and he's had to make a lot, the ruthlessness of him as a man, as a manager, and then this wild journey of certainly the last sort of 18 months or so, where it's just the upward trajectory has been pretty incredible. And, it was a lot of fun to do. It was a lot of fun. I don't know if you've ever run a marathon or a half marathon. Is that anything you've ever done before?
I have run a distance that is somewhat less than that.
Right.
But no, not half marathon.
I've run
10K.
I've run one half marathon in my life, and I remember getting to the finishing line and distinctly thinking, "I'm never doing that again." And when I finished the book, basically, that was straight in my head. Was that exact feeling? It was like, yeah, that was great, but I'm certainly I might not. I'd never say never, but I'm going to give myself a bit of a break before I get into that again. It was a lot of fun, but it was very, very demanding.
Yeah, the exhilaration you get after putting yourself through something, trying. I've had that feeling. It's like when you leave a churrascaria. But like I would say, when you went through this process, one thing that I'm sort of curious about. And we won't spend too much time on this because I want people to read the book. And by the way, get the book. I mean, it is absolutely fantastic and worth the read. And I think insight into the man who we are putting our hopes and dreams into right now, and at the start of the season, I think it makes for fascinating context. But you mentioned the lows, and there were lows. As you had to revisit that period, did it strike you that it is pretty unique and remarkable that the club stuck by him? Or was it just so obvious what he would be that it wasn't even a challenge? Because I remember at the time thinking, I couldn't think of another example of a manager hitting such a low at a big club and coming out the other side of it successful. I think that is very rare. And we've seen at other clubs that they've not been willing to persist with managers. And by and large, you could argue it was the right choice not to persist with managers. They've had some pretty poor ones. But now as a result, you have some clubs that are in a bit of a loop of just hiring and firing, in and out the revolving door. How did you experience looking back on the difficult period and the decision, if it even was a decision, for the club to stick with him, and how the character and fortitude he showed to come through that to be what he is now?
Yeah, it was a really interesting part of the book, actually, going back to that, because, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but it feels like it, that period. And, I mean, there was no decision as far as I'm aware, and I talk about that in the book. The club were absolutely adamant, even in those dark days, that he was still the right man. And I kind of throw that back to, I compare that to Emery, where, I was there for the Emery era, and it was so, and again, I'll talk about this in the book, it was so obvious that was that had broken down and that there was a change that had to take place. And I talk about a day I was at the training ground just before Emery got sacked. It was 2 days before he got sacked, and it was in the build-up to the Frankfurt game, which was, of course, his final game. And being there and watching training and seeing just the complete... He was just on his own. Players were nowhere near him. There was no relationship. It was so obvious he was a dead man walking from being there. And then with Mikel, even in those dark days, and I go back to, I don't really consider those first 3 games of last season, 2 seasons ago, as the dark day. I go back to the season before that run up to Christmas when...
Oh, I totally agree, by the way. Yeah.
And
yeah.
The Everton game is the one that stands out just before Christmas when they lost at Goodison Park. And I remember I was driving back from Goodison it was like December 19th or something. We're in the height of the pandemic. London had just been plunged into the zone 4 or whatever it was at that point of the pandemic. And I was listening on the radio and I was just thinking, he could go, he couldn't have any complaints if he went here. And that for me was the sort of the darkest point of Mikel Arteta's reign. That was from then on, obviously Boxing Day, he brought in the youngsters, they beat Chelsea, and we sort of started to see the new look Arsenal emerge from that. And but I never got the impression from speaking to people at Arsenal that he was going to go around then. They were always really staunch in his support, even though what was happening, they all believed in the long-term project. They all knew that really difficult decisions had to be made. They knew there was going to be difficult times because of that, but they all believed that he was the right man. And the players, more importantly, believed. And from being around the squad, speaking to people, and I have this all in the book, I never once felt or got the impression that the players had remotely, down tools or anything. They all still, a few of them didn't because they weren't playing, but most of them, the majority, all believed in him. And that's why, Arsenal never felt like they were going to make a change because they still backed him and the owners backed him, the players backed him. And that was the difference between him and Emery. It was clear with Emery, it was over. You've never, even in the dark points of Mikel, you never got to that point with him.
Yeah. I think one fascinating thing about the low ebb, and I agree with you, by the way, the 3 games start to the season before last, to me, just made sense. We hadn't gotten our business done, which is not Mikel's fault. We had COVID absences, and we had 2 of the best teams in the league at the time to play, one away, one at home in Manchester City. I felt that was a setup for failure going into it. The one you referenced, I really think an interesting dynamic of that period is that there were no fans in the stands. If there had been fans at the ground, I'm really curious, first of all, would they have stood by him? If they hadn't, which you could understand given how we were performing, would the atmosphere at the Emirates have pushed the club in a direction they may not have felt pushed in with an empty stadium? So very interesting dynamic. And then, of course, look, things did turn around. I want to ask you one more thing. The All or Nothing documentary gave us a little peek behind the curtain. And one of the things that came out of the All or Nothing documentary that I think was had a different reception among different groups of people with some of his motivational techniques before the match and some of his team talks and things like that. Just in terms of how the players respond to this manager, I think it is very hard for people who are not professional athletes, and I can speak as someone who is soundly in the camp of not being a professional athlete, to identify with the absolute sort of fanatical devotion that these very young men have to give to their careers to get to the level they are at. Many of whom have been doing it since they were 8 years old, have not had traditional childhoods. And so we cannot necessarily identify with the type of engagement they need to motivate them. In some ways, they're just kids, but in other ways, they're totally unlike any person we would interact with. What's your sense of, because Mikel is a very, I think, deeply serious, deeply committed person. What's your sense of how he resonates with them and how he connects with them? Because I remember very clearly a scene in All or Nothing where Edu's talking to Josh Kroenke and he's pointing to Mikel, and Mikel's sort of making the rounds in the cafeteria. And Edu says, "You see that? See the way he's engaging with the players?" He's like, if he gets that side of it, he can go to the very top. That's the piece he needs. So what's your feeling of the evolution of Mikel in terms of his connection to players, understanding the players and the way they relate back to him? Because from the tactical standpoint, we know he gets it. It's that other part that I think is a really interesting side of him.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, again, I talk about this quite a bit in the book because it's a really interesting part of Mikel, because on one side, as I said, the players back him and they love what he does. but not all of them. And from speaking to people around it, the one thing you always hear about Mikel is if you're not on the kind of inside with Mikel, if you're not in the group that he really rates and likes, you can feel out in the cold. And a lot of people I've spoken to say that's an area which he needs to learn and to improve on if he's going to continue to progress as a manager at his feet. Because some people do feel left out and have felt left out when working with him. And I reference that in the book. It's an area where perhaps he needs to improve and work on. But on the other side of it, when you do feel like you're in the inner circle with Mikel, players will want to run through brick walls for him. They believe in him. They absolutely believe in him and what he wants to do. And I agree with you. I think, All or Nothing was, I really, really enjoyed it. And I thought it gave us all an insight that, that we're not usually privy to. Even myself as a journalist who goes down the training ground, we don't see all that sort of stuff. We aren't allowed to see that sort of stuff. And it's really interesting for us. We can look at it and think, God, that's a bit, David Brent-esque and things like that. Mm-hmm. I get why people point that out. But if you're one of those players in there and you need motivating and you're looking at the guy doing this, you've got a completely different mindset to it. And it works. And it clearly works. We've seen that it works by the performances on the pitch and the environment that Mikel has created at Arsenal. And it is just worlds apart now. In the space of 4 years, what he's built at Arsenal and the environment he's built is incredible, and the difference is just chalk and cheese. And like I said, I always go back to what it was like at the end of Emery to what it is now, and just the training ground, the work he's done there in just changing the face of the training ground, the motivational stuff he's put on the walls, on the floor that you have to walk under, every little bit that he thinks could improve, any little edge he thinks he can get to improve the players and improve the chances of winning, which is what it's all about, and it's what Mikel's all about. And this comes through in the book, is his absolute unquenchable thirst to win and improve is what is behind all of these decisions he makes, all the motivational stuff he does, everything he thinks about when he's at the training ground is all about winning. And I just think that's such an interesting part of his character.
Yeah, and I don't think he works without that. I think it's an important part of what works. To your point about saying he can improve on, I do wonder if quietly Edu or the club would be like, you may not love these guys, but can you pretend you like them just enough so we can sell them? Because when you're on the outside with him, it's very obvious you're on the outside. And I wonder if that puts the club in a difficult position trying to negotiate deals to move those players out. It doesn't create a lot of leverage. Let's put it that way. When players are posting pictures to social media of like the out group that trained alone, as a cluster of the unmentionables or whatever. Look, we're going to get into some transfer stuff. We're going to get into some contemporary season stuff. But before we do that, I just want to remind everyone, the book is Revolution, The Rise of Arteta's Arsenal. You'll see a link in the show notes to where you can find it. But of course, you can find it at all of your favorite booksellers, whoever those may be. I want to mention that on the back, there's a picture of a scene that you might recognize. I recognize it because I saw it through the warm embrace of Clive, Reece Nelson's winner against Bournemouth. So that's something to look forward to. And it's just a fantastic book that you should absolutely give a read and a quick read too. So I think you'll really enjoy it. So Charles, are you okay if we depart from the book as a launch point for the conversation, get into some other nonsense that people are interested in?
Absolutely. Let's go for it.
All right. Well, on the transfer front, I think there's sort of a recognition / acceptance that if Arsenal are going to do anything else this summer, a big component of that is moving players on. So let's just start with me asking if the premise is correct. Do you believe that if Arsenal intend to do anything in terms of incomings, that outgoings are going to have to happen first?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, easy enough. I think that makes a lot of sense in the context of what we're doing. And also just in terms of numbers, I want to start with one that's not really in the news, but is sort of surprisingly not in the news. And if the situation has changed, Kieran Tierney did not make the matchday squad against Forest. Did he make it against Palace? Now that I think about it, no, he did not. So that's 2 matchday squads, right, that he was not involved in. The Timber injury may make it appear that he's closer to being in the plans than he might have otherwise. But again, he plays the position in a kind of different way. Newcastle were very strongly linked to start the window, and it's gone kind of quiet. He's on the kind of wage that can make it a little tricky for some clubs. He doesn't have the cleanest injury history, but I think he's quite a good player and not one who should be third choice or fourth choice anything at Arsenal. That's not commensurate with the level of the player that he is. Do you think Arsenal will find a suitor for him that's willing to pay a reasonable fee so he can move on this summer?
I mean, at the start of the window, I'd have said yes, 100%. And I'm really surprised that we've got to where we are and Kieran Tierney's still at Arsenal and they haven't found a buyer. I thought he was going to go to Newcastle. I was convinced he was going to go to Newcastle. Something changed in their thinking and they decided not to step up their interest and firm up their interest with a bid. They've ended up signing Lewis Hall from Chelsea, which I don't get. I don't really understand. If you've got Tierney there, I don't know why you don't sign Kieran Tierney. And it's left Arsenal in a bit of a tricky position with him. Like you said, his wages are pretty big. We're at the stage of the window now where it almost becomes, it does become more of a buyer's market because the clubs who want to shift players on are sitting there thinking, we've only got 8 days left to sell these players. What are we going to do? And there is interest in Tierney. Sociedad is still interested in Tierney. I think for him, that would be a brilliant move. It's a fantastic city. They're in the Champions League. But I don't look at it and think Sociedad are going to be able to pay Arsenal what they want. And so you then start getting into realms of loans with an option to buy. For Arsenal, it's just not ideal because it basically kicks it all down the street for another year, and then you're back in the same situation next year. So it's a strange one. I feel sorry for Kieran Tierney. I think he's too good not to be in matchday squads. But I think at the moment, while his future is being resolved and Arsenal are trying to resolve it, I think that's a big part of why he's not in the squad at the moment. I look at even players like Arthur Okonkwo is not in any squads at the moment for the first team or the youth teams. And I think that's a similar situation. It's trying to resolve his future. Nicolas Pepe, another. I think Arsenal are trying to get all these things done, work out what they're going to do. And, I think if Tierney's still an Arsenal player after the 31st, and they've moved on enough players that he can be registered, I think he'll certainly come into the squad because he's too good to be sitting in Arsenal, not using him at all. But I just feel sorry for Tierney. Arsenal just evolved in a way that doesn't suit Kieran Tierney under Mikel Arteta. He's good. I think he improves half of the Premier League teams if he goes in there into their starting 11. But unfortunately for him, he's just not suited to the way Arteta plays. And I don't think Timber's injury changed anything, to be honest. I still think he doesn't play. Mikel showed in the summer, he used every option he had ahead, he used Tierney. And even when Tierney came on, he played really well, I thought, in the whole of pre-season. He made impacts in all the games. And yet, there he is, again, behind a centre-back playing left-back. And, like a right-back playing left-back in Tomiyasu. It's just, I feel sorry for him.
Yeah, I think the thing that happens for me when I watch Kieran Tierney is I see a player who, it's so reductive to say he just doesn't fit, but he just doesn't fit. You look the way his clearances, he's got that instinct, get it away from goal, those big long clearances, headers that aren't really directed at anybody, bursting down the wing and putting it across, whether there's someone there to get on the end of it or not. And I just think if you put him in a team that wants to play with a more traditional fullback, suddenly you'd see his qualities. But in our team, unfortunately, the actions he takes just don't fit the way we want to play. I think, to your point, let's say it was Real Sociedad that was interested. Again, wage numbers, always a guess. Their highest earner currently makes 69,000 euros a week, if you believe the numbers that are out there. Kieran Tierney's on double that. Double. So it would then say, well, are they even going to... They couldn't afford to pay a fee, let alone the wage. Will we eat some of the wage? Unless you're looking at like a Premier League club and a decent size one, that's going to be a hard move to make. Let's talk about another player that you assume might be leaving, but maybe not, Nicolas Pepe. There's a lot of belief that a position where we should strengthen is at forward and potentially right wide forward, right? Someone that can be a Bukayo Saka alternate. I think Mikel has a lot of confidence in Reece Nelson, as you would, given some of the moments he's delivered recently, one in particular, but it's still a question of whether he can stay fit, firstly. The thing that I think has really hurt Reece Nelson's career at Arsenal, it's so obvious to say injuries, but it's the timing of injuries. He was injured at times when he could have played, would have been available to play, group stage of the Europa League kind of thing. Now this season, he's injured all of preseason, so he doesn't get to really make the argument for being a player that should be first off the bench or, get some rotational opportunities. Maybe it'll be Reece, but Nicolas Pepe, again, another guy who's on, 140 a week, 28 years old. The clubs that are interested in him certainly can't pay that kind of wage. So there's been talks of contract cancellations. He's been training alone, but this is a player that divides opinion because I think absence makes the heart grow fonder in a way. And I think there's a lot of people that think Nicolas Pepe could do a job in an Arsenal that has a better build-up, better attack, better structure around him. We only ever saw him really in the Emery era when we were kind of a mess. Could he come in and give us something off the bench when we're chasing a game, or spell Saka in a Champions League game. I don't see Mikel coming back to this player, but do you have a sense of what might happen with him as the season approaches? Or, I mean, the window closing approaches?
I think they'll end up cancelling his contract. That's my personal view on it. He is back now. I mean, he's been away the whole summer training on his own. He is back at London Colney now. He posted a picture of himself up in the training in the changing room on his own. I don't, he's not training with a group or anything like that at the moment. I just don't see Arsenal being able to get any sort of offers for Nicolas Pepe between now and the end of the window. I hope they do. It'd be great if they did, but I just don't see any clubs looking at this from afar and they're thinking Arsenal are going to cancel his contracts. Why would we offer any money for him right now? And like you said, he's on 140 grand a week, so no one who would be interested in Pepe would want to pay a transfer fee for him. And
we should sell him to United for half of what they paid for Anthony.
Yeah.
How about that? It's a steal.
He's better than Anthony. And I feel, I think Nicolas Pepe's done all right at Arsenal. He just, again, it's similar to Kieran Tierney. Arsenal just evolved in a way didn't fit Nicolas Pepe. And Arteta and him just didn't have that connection. It just didn't really work. But he did well for Arteta. He played such a huge role in winning the FA Cup in Arteta's first season. And the second season, he did well as well. He scored a lot of goals. He was Arsenal, I think he was top scorer or second. He got about 17 goals that season. So he's not been a flop. He's just, again, the team has just moved on without him and evolved without him. And I just don't see Arteta using him this season. I've seen the argument that people are saying, let's bring him back. Rather than cancelling his contract, let's just keep him for the season. But I just don't see that argument because I don't believe Arteta will use him. I think he'll use every other option he has ahead of Nicolas Pepe, Reece Nelson, Kai Havertz, Leandro Trossard. They'll all play ahead of him on the right-hand side. And so what is the point in keeping him? For Arsenal, what's the point? You're keeping around, you're paying all those wages for another year. And for Pepe, what's the point? You're sitting around wasting a year of your career when you're 28 years old. I just think for all parties, for me, it just screams early contract termination. Let him go off, continue his career because he's good. He's a good player. He doesn't deserve to sit around. And I just think that's how that's going to happen. I would love a Saudi club to come in and offer Arsenal 20 million euros, 20 million pounds before deadline. But I just, from a business point of view, if you're a club and you're a sporting director, why would you go anywhere near that? It just wouldn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little strange. I mean, this is a guy who in 1,600 minutes in 2021-22 season had 10 Premier League goals. That's pretty reasonable. It seems, there are a lot of clubs that would really like to have a player that could do that. I mean, I'm watching 34-year-old Jordan Ayew play, down the right wing for Crystal Palace. He can't do a job there. Now, they may just say we're not going to invest that kind of wage in a player at that age, but they just offered Wilf Zaha, double that to stay. And he's past 30 or 30 maybe. And I don't think he has more than 10 goals in a Premier League season on his CV. So it's just sort of weird to me. Like, there must be something about Pepe that has clubs wanting to stay away because there are teams that need goals and he has goals. If he has anything in him, he's got goals in him. And he has, where he has goals in him? In a counterattacking situation. I think that's how he proved himself in France. And there are a lot of teams that are going to counterattack. I mean, you could argue that, heck, Manchester United might be better off with Pepe streaming down the wing than Anthony, just a thought. But yeah, it's an unfortunate situation. And this, there would be people I think that would criticize the club, Charles, that would say, we haven't managed this right, that we can't make a market for him. But if we're going to have to cancel his contract, he's going to wind up someplace like Turkey. What that tells me is there isn't a market. Now what would be interesting is if we cancel his contract and then some Premier League club all of a sudden does pop up and buy him, that would, or sign him. That does suggest that maybe we haven't managed the situation right. Let's get to one where there is a market, and that's Flo Balogun, U.S. superstar Flo Balogun, star American striker.
One of your own.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our own. Red-blooded American there. Flo Balogun is, ironically, kind of similar to Pepe, a guy who made his name with an explosive season in France. And I think, to be fair, looked pretty sharp in preseason for Arsenal. I suspect we would have been happy to keep him and use him. He doesn't want that. And I don't know that I could, that people are always so quick to want to blame players for not just being the good soldier for the club. Their careers are short and they have to look after them. A player that wants to play and wants to go prove himself somewhere, I can't look down on that after so many years of complaining about players who were happy to collect a wage at Arsenal and not play. So you can't have it both ways, right? You can't say, oh, Cedric was just happy to, collect a wage at Arsenal, and then say, oh, Flo Balogun, he's just selfish and looking out for himself. Like, he has a right to go play, but we got to find him a club and we got to collect a fee. That's a player at his age, on his wage, should command a big fee, especially looking around the market and what teams are paying. So are we going to get that big fee somewhere?
I think they will. Look, I think it's a big few days for Balogun and his future. I think come the weekend, we should know more about where potentially he is going to be going. I'll be surprised if it hasn't moved on. I know things are ongoing at the moment. Arsenal Monaco is still very much talking over Balogun. Arsenal have rejected offers from Monaco for him, but those talks are still going on to try and come to a sort of agreement in terms of, look, Monaco know what Arsenal want. It's a case of, can you get an agreement in terms of the total package, the sell on, the add-ons, all that sort of stuff, to get to a number where Arsenal deem it successful. They're really trying. They want him. I think it'd be a really good move for Balogun going to Monaco as well. He obviously knows France. I think Monaco are a great club, historic club. And
not a bad place to live and
not
play
a bad
football
place to live either. There are worse areas to live than Monaco. And so we'll see. But Chelsea are sniffing around. For me, it doesn't sit well with me, the thought of Balogun, Arsenal doing business for Chelsea for Balogun. I'd much rather him go to Monaco. I understand if Chelsea come in and slap a ridiculous offer on the table, then Arsenal might have to think about it. But for me, it should be a ridiculous offer. There's no, I can understand Arsenal compromising with Monaco to get an agreement. There should be no compromising with Chelsea to get an agreement for Flo Balogun. It would be, you're right, you hit our number and that's it. Otherwise, we're not talking. So, yeah, and I like you. I don't blame Balogun for wanting to go either and wanting to play. He's had a taste of it. He's done really, really well. Why would you then want to go and sort of just sit on the bench hoping for opportunities, even at a club like Arsenal? I think he's always been an ambitious guy. He very nearly left before signing his last contract. Arsenal managed to talk him round and get him to stay, but he's always had this ambition of being the main man up front, and I don't think he sees the pathway, and I don't really see the pathway for that happening at Arsenal just yet. And so let him go, get good money in for him, and move on. I think Fulham are in the running kind of as well, but it's nowhere near as progressed as it is with Monaco. They've just got a lot of money for Mitrovic. There's a big gaping hole there up front that they need to fill. Again, for Balogun, I think that'd be appealing. Staying in London, Premier League club, real chance to be the main man for a Premier League club, a good one with a good manager. But I still think Monaco are probably, right now, if you ask me who's in pole position, I'd still probably say Monaco. But I think it's going to be a really interesting few days coming up for Balogun.
It's interesting. Initially, I was made up. My mind was made up. Balogun can't go to Chelsea. That's the one thing we just can't do. Don't do that. If you have to take less money, take less money. But the more I think about it, Chelsea with Enzo and Caicedo and Nkunku and Nico Jackson and Mudryk and Sterling, if they had a star striker, they could be pretty good, maybe. If they go for Balogun, that's not a guy who I'm convinced is ready to step into a Premier League team and be a 20-goal striker. I'm not convinced that's where he is at his development. There's no guarantee he'll get there. If they don't get Balogun, maybe suddenly you're talking about Bowley slapping down 100 million for Osimhen in the next window or the window after, something like. I guess what I'm saying is the scenario where Chelsea go for a scarier striker than Balogun is out there. Maybe you take a lot of money for Balogun and roll the dice on the idea that Chelsea wind up having to invest in him, and maybe he doesn't, he might be good but not great as opposed to some of the other players they go for. But look, it's all speculation. The one thing that would really, really suck, obviously, is for him to go to Chelsea and ascend and be great. And, don't need that. Especially, look, I lived through the Pulisic at Chelsea era. Thankfully, it didn't go very well. But, when you're talking about a red-blooded American hero like Flo Balogun, we don't want to see him at Chelsea, obviously. I think, so we'll set that aside. There's another one that we'll touch on, and we'll move through these quickly. Be thoughtful of your time here. Gabriel Magalhaes. Mikel said there's nothing in it as relates to the selection. I don't think we'll sell him. I think Fabrizio Romano has tweeted we won't sell him. I guess I have a two-part question for you. Part one is, do you think there's any chance we'd consider selling him? But part two is, even if we don't, are you a believer that him not starting these first two games is related to the potential interest? because I'm leaning now more towards, I think it is actually just tactical, but I understand why some people just can't get there intellectually. So do you think we'd even entertain selling? Is it a realistic possibility? And then regardless of that, do you think that's had an influence on him not starting these games?
Oh, it's really tough on this one. In terms of would they entertain selling? It's hard to say no, because if someone puts, Saudi come in and put £100 million offer on the table for him, they probably would entertain selling him just because of that amount of money. But they absolutely, they don't want to sell him by any means. And I think it would be absolutely crazy. I think it'd be catastrophic for Arsenal's season if you sold Gabriel at this stage of the window. It'd be mad. There's no benefit to it on a footballing side of things at all. You're not going to get a better player than him in a week. All the money that you get for him, whoever you move for next, that club's going to know that you're desperate for a centre-back, and you're basically going to have to put it all back out again to get a centre-back, and then they've got to bed in, adjust. They might not be as good. They probably won't be as good. It would make no sense whatsoever. So, no, they should not entertain any sort of offers whatsoever for him. I think
look no further than West Ham trying to spend their Declan Rice money, right? We've seen it happen to Spurs when they sold.
And there's only a week
Bale
left in the window. It's like literally, I mean, as a selling club, you'd be laughing if Arsenal came in for your centre-back if they'd just sold Gabriel, wouldn't you? You'd put £20 million on the price tag straight away. And because, they'd be desperate. So it would not make any sense. And it would be awful. I do, and this is just a hunch. It's not something I've got in terms of information. I do feel like his absence might be something to do with it, because the interest is there. There's definitely interest from Saudi Arabia in him. And I just think just throughout pre-season, there was no hint that we were suddenly going to see Gabriel out of the team or anything like that. And then for it to happen straight, at the start of the season, it just felt really odd, and it still feels a little bit odd. And I heard what Mikel said, and it's all tactical, but I don't know. I feel like there's maybe a little bit more in it than that. I actually do think he'll start on Saturday. If Zinchenko comes in at left back, I think Gabriel comes back alongside Saliba for me, because we'll probably then see Ben White go back out to right back. And I can't imagine Partey and Zinchenko both starting together in the back four. So I think we'll see Gabriel come back in against Fulham if Zinchenko plays. And that can't happen soon enough for me. I think he has to come back into the team. I don't, I'm not tactically some football tactical genius, and I bow to those who are far superior in it than me. But I look at what Mikel's done in the opening 2 games, and look, they've got 6 points from 6. They've won both games, but I don't really want to see that long term for Arsenal. I have to admit.
You may not know this, but all Twitter Tacticos tweets are written by ChatGPT, so I wouldn't worry about it. Or at least they sound like they are. I guess my only rejoinder to people that say he hasn't been playing because of the Saudi thing is this. We're playing a wide 3 at the back in build-up, right? A 3-2. Let's assume Zinchenko hasn't been available for selection. And let's assume that Mikel wants to build up in that 3-2. He wants Partey and Rice available to play in the midfield in front of 3 defenders. White, Saliba, and a wide left-sided defender who sometimes plays more like a left back and sometimes plays like a left center back. Where would Gabriel have started? Again, assuming Zinchenko's not fit, we say, well, why not just go White, Saliba, Gabriel, Tomiyasu? Because then you only have one of Partey and Rice. And if you pick Partey, then you only have one of Havertz or Rice. And what he's been able to do with this system is get both Rice and Partey at times playing sort of in a double pivot, still have the 3 in front of that and still have 1 in front of that. Pardon me, 2 in front of that and 3 in front of that. I just think it's a system, that 3-2-2-3 that we're doing, where you can't really pick 2 center backs. And then you could say, no, I think it's about the transfer, which I get. But if it's about the transfer, that's because to some extent you think the player's head's been turned or his focus isn't right, or whatever the case may be. But he's going to wear the armband and come on down to 10 men away to show guts and commitment to defend a critical 3 points. Like, I can't square that circle. You know what I mean, Charles? I can't see a world where he can't start because of the interest, but he can come on in the most pressurized situation and wear the armband and lead us to 3 points down to 10 men. The two things feel incompatible. And so when I look at the formation he's going with, for me, I say, I don't see a position for him. To your point, I think Zinchenko coming back does change that. But you watch, if we go to White, Saliba, Gabriel, and Zinchenko, you cannot pick Partey, Rice, and Havertz. You can't. I mean, unless Havertz moves to 9. You see what I'm saying? Right?
Yeah.
There is no world where you can pick them. You have to drop one of those 3 players. And I think he wants all 3 of those on the pitch for, whatever the tactical reasons are. So just quickly, do you at least see the argument that there are at least some signs in how we're playing, the players we're putting on the pitch, and the situations Gabriel's been trusted, that maybe this is a tactical innovation that while we may not trust it completely, we may not like Partey at right back or nominally right back, we may not totally understand what Mikel's doing yet, that if you just try to figure out a way to put Gabriel on the pitch with those players, you suddenly see that it's not as easy as you think.
Yeah, no, I do agree. And tactically, I look at it as well and think, if you are having Partey playing over there at right back and he is going to be moving into the midfield, you would much rather have Ben White as the right side sort of centre back or whatever you want to call him in that position, because he can still get on the overlap and still provide and get into the space vacated by Thomas Partey. So I absolutely, I look at, like you said, I look at how Arsenal set up and I get it. I 100% get it. And there is definitely a tactical reason for it. But I don't know, it's just my sense of like, it still feels...
You're in the majority, I think.
I thought Gabriel was brilliant when he came on against Crystal Palace as well, by the way. I thought it was so important in seeing that game out, and he certainly didn't look like he had his head turned or anything like that. And I don't believe he's had his head turned either. I get it tactically, but I just have that sense that it just feels like, to me, there might be something bubbling away behind the scenes that maybe Mikel's thinking, I might just ease him into things at the moment while this all sort of bubbles away until the window's shut, and then we'll bring him back. But I tell you what, he's a brilliant option to have on. You'd much rather see Gabriel coming on for the last half an hour than Rob Holding to see out a game, put it that way.
You're in the majority. I think what I would say is if we had played, let's say, City away, I think you would have seen more of a traditional back four with Gabriel in it. And oh, by the way, he started the Community Shield, right? In against a team where we knew we wouldn't have all the ball. I don't know. I'll be very curious to see how it plays out. We'll get out of here with 2 quick ones. One, there's some other outgoings we don't have to get to. Nuno Tavares, quickly. Will we get a fee, you think?
Oh, get a fee, yeah, 100%. They should get a fee. I think Nuno's an interesting player, to be honest. And I know he's obviously, there's deficiencies there that are clear for all to see, but I think there's also a lot of positives there for him as well. And Arsenal should absolutely they should make money on Nuno Tavares, I think, this summer.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because people would say, how can you get a good fee for Nuno, but you can't get a fee for Tierney? And I think that just shows you that a younger player on a much smaller wage is an easier guy to get a fee for. Incomings, is your sense that there would be one? And at this point, does it have to be a defender, or could we still be looking at a forward? I know tenuous links with Kudus at one time, obviously not the case anymore. Defender or nothing, or do you think there could be a forward option?
I still feel that there's more likely to sign a forward option than a defensive option.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the Timber injury is necessarily going to make them go in. I think if an opportunity arises, they think that works. I think they'd probably try and do it, but maybe a loan or something like that just to provide cover. I think I can't see them going out and spending a decent chunk of money on someone to replace a player that they've just spent a massive chunk of money on, who's going to, fingers crossed, be back in 9 months and be better than ever. Fingers crossed again. I think you almost then start to stockpile problems, and it could become a bit of a problem later on, a year down the line. So I look at that squad and I look at where I still think probably it needs a little bit more strength in depth, and it is more in attacking areas for me. And if they can get a deal done for that, that's the area I still look at and think they might well do, but they need to bring some money in. They need to get some money in. I can't, if we get to this end of the window and they haven't made any decent sales between now and then, I'd be very, very surprised if Arsenal do any more business incoming-wise.
Yeah. Okay. And I don't think that would be outside of what most people expect. And then last but not least, let's just give you a chance to say one fun thing on this. Declan Rice, great player or the greatest player? How impressed have you been? Oh, I know it's through 2 games, but man of the match already in his second game, and in a game that had both, right? A dominant spell where we controlled the game, and then a spell where he had to play suffer ball, which he is absolutely familiar with doing from his time at West Ham. What are your thoughts? Early returns for Rice, and if you want to throw in there 2 early returns for Havertz, who maybe divides opinion a bit more.
Yeah, I love Rice. We're getting exactly what I expected from Declan Rice. I was so excited about this signing. I thought it was going to be a transformational signing for Arsenal, the biggest signing they'd made since Sol Campbell in 2001 in terms of what it meant on the pitch, but off the pitch as well, about where they are as a club. And I think he's been brilliant. At Palace, he was an absolute sensation in that Palace game, both going forward defensively I think, and he's only going to get better. He's a leader, and he's not going to be someone who's affected by £110 million price tag either. I think he'll be fine with that, and he'll thrive on it, if anything. So yeah, really excited what he's going to bring. Havertz, I just feel I feel sorry for Havertz. I don't think he's done anything wrong in these 2 games. I think Mikel Arteta will be sitting at London Colney now, very happy with how Kai Havertz has performed in these 2 games. I think he's got exactly what he wanted from him. And yeah, I just think he's just in that unfortunate position where certainly the online fan base are just on his back because he's Chelsea. They didn't want him. They would have rather seen the money spent on a striker. But from a manager's point of view, I think Havertz is giving Arteta what he wants, and I think he's going to get better as well. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the criticism is very, very unfair on him. He's done nothing wrong. He's done nothing great, and I want to see more from him, 100%. I still don't totally get the deal myself. I kind of feel like, could Emil Smith-Rowe have played there, and other players have played there and given a little bit more? Leandro Trossard, can you get him on the pitch rather than Kai Havertz? So it was a deal that I was really surprised at, and I'm still not fully convinced by at all, but I think the criticism is really, really harsh. He's played 2 games. The Arsenal won both games, and he's done nothing wrong in those games. So just give the guy a bit of time to adjust to a new team, to a new manager, a new way. I sat down with Tomiyasu last season, and I spoke to him, this is in the book actually, about what is improved. How have Arsenal taken this jump from promising, which they were the previous season, to title contenders? And he said, we just understand Mikel. Last year we knew what he wanted, but we just couldn't quite do it yet. It takes a long time to understand what Mikel Arteta wants, and we get that now. We understand it more now, and that's what you're seeing on the pitch. And I always think that with when I look at Havertz, some players like Declan Rice, they just get it. They're just good enough. They can come in and do it. But with someone like Havertz, it might take a little bit of time. So yeah, I'm not writing him off at all at this early.
Well said. You know how I'd put it? I'd say it like this. I think Havertz has been absolutely fine and basically given us what Xhaka gave us, in his first 2 games. The way I would say it is, Kai Havertz has been perfectly fine in the first 2 games. If this is the ceiling of what he gives us, it was not a good deal because it's functional, but not explosive, not additive, not accretive versus other options we had in that position. But if this is the baseline of what he gives us and he can go up from here, it's a very good baseline because the baseline is fitted right in, good enough, provides what that position needs at a base level. Now he does have to go on and layer all that stuff into it. And I think it's incumbent upon his teammates as well, not to get too deep into this, but, rewatching the Palace game, he does make some great second man runs and, runs to the back post, and teammates are going to, I think, especially Odegaard and Saka, start to figure out that in swinger to pick him out at the back post and things like that. That'll become a big weapon for us. So we'll see. I think we should leave it there. The book is Revolution, The Rise of Arteta's Arsenal. You can find it basically everywhere. You can go to the Tollington and get it signed by Charles and hear some great chat. You can follow Charles more on his website at charleswatts.football. You can check out his fantastic YouTube channel, and it is my absolute pleasure to speak with Charles, and also my hope that I will get the chance to do it again in the near future. Charles, thanks so much.
You will, 100%. It comes out in the States in November, by the way, as well. It's coming over there in November. Get it yet. Not in the States. Well, you know what? But you can. It's coming out in November over there, so you can certainly get it. It's coming.
Or you can come to my house and you can borrow it from me. There are options. But no, we want you to wait till November to buy it in the States, but you can buy it in the UK. So, well, how about then? I know at least in November, I can tantalize you with a chance to talk about the book again when it's out in the States and at least rope you back into coming on the pod. Thanks so much.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Elliot. Appreciate it, mate.